Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Today we'll be discussing the question of whether or not the soul of one of the most dark wizards to ever live, Lord Voldemort, would have survived if a Dementor had performed the infamous Dementor's kiss on him. What is the Dementor's kiss? Dementors are certainly a special form of nightmare fuel, which means that if you've read about them or seen them in the Harry Potter films, you've likely found it quite difficult to forget them or what they look like. But just in case, for those of you who may be new to the wizarding world of Harry Potter, Dementors are the ghoulish-looking magical beings that float around like a bunch of grim reapers, in search of their very own Ebenezer Scrooge to torment. And in all honesty, they look exactly like the typical Grim Reaper of old, with the exception of the scythe, of course. There's also a lot of them, whereas in common lore, there's usually just one lone Grim Reaper, presumably because this figure is typically a representation of death. In any case, the Dementors in Harry Potter are terrifying ghouls who enjoy gorging themselves on none other than human souls. This delightful act is known within the wizarding world as the Dementor's kiss, aka the sucking of a person's soul out of their body. When the Dementor's kiss is performed, the Dementor pulls back its hood, clamps its jaw around the victim's mouth, and consumes their soul. Yikes. As Dementors were used to help safeguard the wizarding prison of Azkaban, it's no surprise that the Dementor's kiss was sometimes performed upon criminals as a sentence decreed by the Ministry of Magic. It's rumored that the act of the kiss was possibly reserved for the specific crime of escaping from Azkaban, since several very serious criminals, like Bellatrix Lestrange, were never sentenced to the Dementor's kiss. This seems a bit odd, since the Dementor's kiss was viewed by many witches and wizards to actually be a fate worse than death. Presumably this is because the Dementor's kiss would leave the victim an empty husk of a human, alive but not really. Just a body without the ability to think or feel, and the mind in a persistent vegetative state. The witch or wizard irretrievably gone. For this reason, it was widely suspected that anyone who had the kiss performed on them was unable to return as a ghost, since their soul had been consumed by the Dementor. It is said that no one truly knows what happens to the soul when it's ingested by a Dementor. Throughout the Harry Potter series, we see Dementors perform, or almost perform, the kiss on a number of occasions, from their attempt to consume the three souls of Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Sirius Black near the Black Lake in The Prisoner of Azkaban, to their performance of the kiss on Barty Crouch Jr. in The Goblet of Fire. There's even that time that Harry saves his ungrateful cousin Dudley Dursley from two Dementors in Little Whinging, far away from the grounds of both Hogwarts Castle and Azkaban. Which brings us to today's question. If a Dementor had performed the kiss on Lord Voldemort, what would have happened? Would his soul have been able to survive the kiss? Why or why not? To properly answer this question, I think we must address it in steps, carefully considering the different stages of Voldemort's life. To start with, if the Dementor's kiss had been performed on a young Tom Riddle before he became Voldemort, I'm quite confident that he would not have survived. Instead, Tom would have become a vegetable, and the Dark Lord would have never come to be. I believe this to be true regardless of whether Tom was a little boy or the ruthless and cunning young man he became near the end of his education at Hogwarts. I think it's also fairly safe to say that if a Dementor had sucked Voldemort's soul out of his body before the Dark Lord had created his Horcruxes, even if he was already rising in power as he was in the 1970s, I don't think Voldemort's soul would have been able to withstand the effects of the Dementor's kiss. That is, I suppose, unless he'd already begun making Horcruxes and hiding his soul across the country. But more on that in just a minute. In any case, this all leads us to the real question. After splitting his soul so many times, what would the Dementors even have to suck out of Voldemort's body? And would this act of the Dementor's kiss be enough to kill the mind and soul of Voldemort, despite the majority of his soul being fragmented and stored in Horcruxes throughout the country? To answer this question, I think we must first consider a well-known fan theory out there regarding Dementors and Harry Potter. According to the theory, Dementors were more attracted to Harry throughout the series than they were to other witches and wizards. This is said to be due in large part to the fact that Harry had more than just his soul in his body. He also had part of Voldemort's soul in there. This, of course, was the result of Harry being one of Voldemort's unsuspecting Horcruxes. And so, with this theory in mind, it stands to reason that Voldemort would have been less appealing to Dementors than any other witch or wizard, since he had, only 1/8 of a soul in his body? Would Dementors have even been interested in performing the Dementor's kiss on the Dark Lord's almost soulless form? Or would it have been a waste of their time and efforts? I mean, surely if he was the only person about, they'd take him for what he had. And so if they had performed the kiss on him at this point in his life, what would have happened? Since Voldemort was somewhat of a shell of a wizard already, devoid of much soul, a fragment of a fragment, if you will, would his soul have been able to survive in a way that others could not? This is a particularly interesting question, since, during his second rise to power in the 1990s, his body was newly created out of blood and other gross things, made specifically to host the bit of his soul that had remained after his Avada Kedavra curse bounced back at him in his attempt to murder an infant Harry Potter. Would it matter that Voldemort's body, the thing hosting the remnants of his soul, was not his original form? For example, it may have been possible for the body, which was created specifically to house and protect this piece of his soul, to have been able to resist the Dementor's kiss and fight back, almost like another Horcrux. I'm imagining a Dementor either going in for the kiss, only to sense that this vessel was not susceptible and backing off, or the Dementor clamping down on Voldemort's face, only to have the Dark Lord's body close off to protect the bit of his soul that was in there, fight back, and irrevocably damage the Dementor in the process. From another perspective, if a Dementor was indeed able to perform the kiss on Voldemort, I suppose you could argue that the Dementors were such powerful beings that the act of the kiss could have triggered the other pieces of the Dark Lord's soul to come flying to the location of the Dementor and Voldemort. The magic wielded by the Dementors seems to be shrouded, pun intended, in so much mystery due to their deadly nature and lack of interest in, shall we say, chit-chat. And so it's not outside of the realm of possibility that in sucking out Voldemort's soul, they could have pulled the Horcruxes from the far reaches of the country with their special brand of magical abilities. And yet, even with these two former theories, I find myself most drawn to one that seems, to me, to be the simplest. I think that if a Dementor had performed the Dementor's kiss on Voldemort, as he was during his second rise to power in the 90s, the Dementor would have sucked out the piece of his soul that was in there, and his body would have gone into a vegetative state. Yet, since Voldemort had split his soul so many times to account for something exactly like this happening, other bits of his soul would have continued to live on in his multiple Horcruxes. One of his soul fragments could then have been presumably reinstated into this body, so in all likelihood, the Dark Lord would have instructed his band of most trusted Death Eaters on what to do in the event of something like this. Take his body, or create a new one if need be, to the nearest Horcrux, and reunite that part of his soul with the host. Meaning that even though the piece of his soul that was in his body wouldn't have been able to survive the Dementor's kiss, Voldemort could have endured and survived. It's scrappy, but it works. And with that, we've come to the end of another video. What did you think? Do you think Voldemort could have survived the Dementor's kiss? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.